What's up, everybody? Welcome to another video in the Ideal Auto Factory. And I am so excited to be bringing you a review, a in-depth review on the Barrell Springs version 1 and version 2. So sit back or grab your RC car and drift around and enjoy the video. Keep God first. Let's get into it. So if you're a drifter, RC drifter, and you have not heard of the Barrell Springs, my gosh, have you been living under a rock? But don't worry, I am here to share with you everything you need to know about them and why they are so important to the drift scene right now. I got mine personally shipped out to me from darkdenim.com, Dark Drift RC. They personally sent me a pair of these Barrell Springs, and I am going to put them to the test in the most transparent way possible. Now, one thing I will note, this is a review from a garage drifter, not a drifter at the P-Towel track or the J-Towel track, not a drifter who's got polished concrete at his disposal all the time. I'm giving you a review straight from a guy who pretty much lives and breathes weight shifts suspension life. And boom, there you go. That's what you're getting. That's the perspective you're getting it from. But I'm not going to leave you empty-handed because of the fact that I don't get to an RC track all the time. I have plenty of experience at an RC track, but I also have plenty of experience driving and knowing what I want the car to do. So enough justifying things. Let's just show you what the Barrell Springs are all about. Now, as you can see here on this version 1, it's the one with more coils. And it has more coils than this one. It's very clear that that has less coils than this does. And that's the version 2. In other words, to simplify, what that means is these are a little softer than these. Barrell, the company itself, I know nothing about. But I do know one thing. When you go to darkdenim.com and then you go to all of the specs on these, it explains it in such a detailed way, you have no reason to second guess what's actually happening. For example, they tell you to run all 4 springs to get the best result because of how they are designed. And I'm going to explain in detail what that means. Okay, quick rant. I changed up this car and I made it all nice and shortened wires and made everything look nice and all that because I'm putting my 360 camera right here and making this my dedicated camera car. And so it's all cleaned up. It looks really nice. And I have the weight distribution where it's supposed to be. You put a battery back here, you put the camera on, and the car pretty much has a level ride height down low like that. It is also shocks pushed in as far as they can go. Shocks as far as they can go in the rear as well. I shortened the rear end, meaning I use B blocks instead of the RDX rear, and now my arms are closer in as well. In other words, I'm letting you know that this is customized. This is not your standard layout, standard setup of a car. And right here, you can see I don't have barely any preload, if at all. And these springs keep the car off the ground. I have plenty of droop. And the springs are functioning like they say they will in the description that is on Dark Denim's website. One of the key features of the actual spring is that it's short. With a short spring, do you have a lot of room to travel? No, not in the springs aspect, but depending on where your dampers are, depending on how far away your dampers are from center, means that this action up and down is affected, and therefore having springs with the right static length helps you. Josh, I'm not following you. What in the world are you talking about? I don't understand. Could you explain in more detail, please? Oh, I am so glad you asked. Let me open up some springs with more coils in them. The Barrell version ones. Okay, so between these three springs, there are three different spring rates, there are three different wire diameters, and there are three different heights. So you got one over here with a total height of, yep, there it is. Yeah, 32 millimeters, 26 millimeters. They're both 26 millimeters there. So the simplest way to put this is the taller the spring, the less you are in control of when that initial force is applied to the suspension. Because at full decompression here, or max droop, the spring is already pushing down on the suspension arm. So on this lower arm and the shock tower, the spring is already pushing down on that shot on that cheese. The spring is already putting forces onto the car at max droop. So this is supposed to be fully relaxed, but with a tall spring, it's already having a force applied. See? I have to, once I start pushing that down, there's a force acting against my finger right there. And I'm not even short like this yet. I'm not compressed to that length yet. This in turn means that if you're at full droop and you let it go, the tendency for this vehicle to stay higher off the ground is higher with a taller spring. Now you can have a super soft tall spring and it doesn't matter. But a super soft tall spring doesn't help you any, because when you go to fully crank down on this collar, you're now inducing a spring rate change, a preload that now lifts up the car. And you know how many times you've been in a situation where you lift it up, it sits. You drop it down, it sits. It doesn't come back up, right? And then you don't have this sweet spot. You're just up, let go, and it stays up, down, let go, and it stays down. That's what taller springs have a higher tendency to do here for a car that does all of this stuff that mine technically doesn't do, because I'm all weight shift qualified here. Instead, I'm going to stop blabbering on this custom vehicle, and then I'm going to directly show you on this. This will be my first time putting these springs on here, which is a vehicle that is less designed for weight shift and more designed for direct performance. And then I'm going to show the same deal, what happens. So now let's install the same springs. Let's put these springs, version 2, the harder springs, on this car. Now look at that. We have now officially changed, and you can see right there. Look at that. That initial, it wants to drop, but it is very hard to push down. Very hard to push down. But I get some travel out of it. See that? Almost at the top. And then you put the weight on it and it doesn't really change. So now that we kind of understand why short springs are having an advantage, now let's put the softer ones on there and check them out. And there goes the less coils, meaning the harder versions. And there goes the more coils, the softer versions. And look at that. Very soft to the touch, but as soon as you push it down a little further, it's like more resistance right there. So that initial pressure is very soft. Now, there's no real reason to hate on this wheel gap, but if you look here, it's a very bouncy car right there. Not designed for weight shift at all. But what I can tell you from this feeling up front is that it gives a direct feel, a very stiff but soft enough to get the car to do things. Let me put the rears on now. They're on the rear now. They're on there. Again, the same initial soft touch, but then it is stiff. It is stiff. Where's my battery? I had one. Where did it go? There goes my battery. Most of the weight is in there now. Yep. And let's see what it does with the body on it. Now, because I know how light this car is, in general, I know that this setup right here is stiff. Now, this is where it gets tricky because literally in the description of what these springs are, it tells you it will feel stiff, but the driving experience will be completely different. With that being said, I'm going to go drive it, and then we're going to see how it feels after that. All right, everyone. So I am here on break, and I have the car. Here, battery installed. About to turn it on. And Barrell springs are there. Up front, like I said, it does feel stiff, but that initial drop is there as soon as I tap on it. So, I'm gonna get my body here. It's on. Let's take it for a spin. Wow. So what did I notice? First and foremost, very direct, very, I guess you could say it's very simple. It's a simplified drifting experience because of the springs being so stiff per se, it doesn't leave a lot of room for any of the other aspects of the vehicle to come into play. This D6 has active tow. The car can have a little bit of bump steer, and then of course with it squatting, then you got a weight transfer to the rear of the car. It being a high battery also changes certain things that the car can do if the suspension was softer. But I'll add again that because of the makeup of the spring being so short, the car is kind of resting in the best performance position. You could say that the car itself is technically squatting at standstill. That's kind of how I picture these springs helping vehicles out. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the car on the scale to see just how much the Sakura D6 weighs, and then I'm going to throw the springs on the RDX camera car in a sense, and then we'll drive that to see if there's any difference. Now, as you saw there, the car weighs in at roughly 1,350 grams, and that is almost as lightweight as you can get it. What can we gather from that information? Well, the car is very light, and then from what we see on the RDX, I'm showing you it again, the springs, the arms, wherever you put those springs at makes a big difference. So the Sakura has the springs, you know, sort of closer to the wheels instead of closer to the chassis. They're spread out on the car. And over here on the RDX, again, no preload on these. With this one, I put the V2s up front and the version 1s in the rear, the softer ones in the rear. With this setup, you can see that the springs are closer to the chassis. Instead of being further out, further away, you can press this car, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more bouncy. And that's because the influence of it being more inward means softer overall, no matter how hard the spring is. So the further out you go, pretty much the harder or stiffer the car is, the less the car wants to do that. And the further inward you go, so bring those in, everything inward, the more the chassis wants to lean left and lean right. So let's drive it. So from what I've gathered just driving it, these springs take out guesswork. They take out the middleman of tuning per se and give you an all-around simple suspension setup. From a Sakura D6 with a very wide spring, I don't even know how to really say the terminology, but the springs are not close to the chassis. The dampers are further away from the chassis, more of a traditional setup to my personalized custom per se RDX with a conversion and all these other things, added high motor and all this other stuff. And the dampers are very narrow. They're closer to the chassis. What these springs offer is an all-around good middle ground. An advanced user could use them, a beginner could use them, but overall I think if you're second guessing a lot of different things that your chassis has going on, this spring setup could eliminate a lot of the problems. Let me explain. Short springs allow for less travel up or down, meaning the car wants to sit in a sweet spot. The sweet spot being what you decide it to be. Does bump steer come into play on these? Not much, because the car does not have a lot of travel that it can do up and down or pitch and roll. But is that the best feature to offer? In my opinion, yes, because these springs are all around universal to a lot of different cars. Putting them on the D6, the D6 felt very direct. The D6 also had one feel to it. I threw it into a trying to do a backy per se, and it felt the same throughout the whole sweep. Doing left and right quick turns or quick transitions, it felt very much the same. So the same applies here. Even though this lifts up and down a little bit, I don't have a lot of play when it comes to what the front end is doing. And therefore, because the front end isn't doing a lot, the steering feels more direct. In the rear, the same way. Camber gain is very much a part of every car. As you can see here, I don't have camber gain when I go up and down. When I lean to the left and lean to the right, my camber changes. I mean, with these springs, the Barrell springs, I don't lean to the left or lean to the right very much. So that means if my settings, my toe, my camber, if all of that is good, these springs definitely allow the car to just sit where the sweet spot is. Because the springs are so short and they offer just a little bit of initial give, that means that I am able to sit right here, exactly where I'm supposed to be. And then that feeling I get across the board, no matter what style I'm driving, no matter what feel I need, the car is consistent. Now with a consistent car, what that also means is that you lose some other benefits. I don't have active toe being activated on my Sakura D6, but do I need it? Who knows? The springs work great and I was able to drive fine. Now, let's move over to the RDX. The RDX has a weight shift characteristic. I am not able to lean or roll and get side bite or get a little bit of that extra kind of like throw that I want out of my vehicle to get a more aggressive catch when I start going into the sweeper. Is that totally necessary? No, but it is a drive style. So maybe that's something you want and you won't get the springs. But overall, with those being eliminated, now you're left with just get in the car and drive. Get your remote, go to the track, put on some Barrell springs, and enjoy your car. Zero preload. Some of these cars, they don't. Let me sit down for this. After building so many chassis over my time in the hobby, I've learned that some of these cars don't even account for suspension travel up and down. Some of these cars don't account for there being more weight transfer in the rear to where your car squats 2 or 3 millimeters. So with these springs, you're automatically eliminating any of those factors. Your car barely, you get probably 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter of movement up and down. It is the weirdest feeling to have a stiff car, but the car drives good. A stiff car sometimes feels like the opposite of what a one-to-one would feel like, because it's not a weight shift style. It is very much direct. But when it comes to driving and having fun, which is what most people are doing, the Barrell springs work. They work for that aspect of drifting. Now, if you want to get more advanced, you get more springs. You want to tune to that perfect spec, you do that. I'll be honest, my Sakura D6, I like the active toe. I like the bump steer that I have on it. So I like the suspension to be softer and to be able to lean and pitch and all of that stuff. But for the RDX, I liked what it was doing. I really do. Now I have, with that, I want to say thank you to darkdenim.com, Dark Drift RC on Instagram, for sending out these Barrell Springs version 1 and version 2. He told me, hey, he likes to run V2 up front and V1 in the rear. And I thoroughly enjoy it. It's a very simple setup. Obviously, it's just springs, so did I talk about camber and all this other stuff? No. Barrell springs are simple. Put them on, flip them around if one is too soft or one is too hard, and go drift. And with that, keep God first. I'll catch you on the next video.